My retired Navy SEAL dog stood in front of a sealed wall inside an abandoned rescue station and refused to move. Then a voice came through the steel. It belonged to a woman who had officially died more than 50 years earlier. Before sunrise, armed men arrived to destroy the station, and Ranger discovered that the wall was hiding far more than an old recording. It held the truth about a rescue boat, 9 missing survivors, and a commander who had ordered children left to die. What Ranger found behind that wall would force both of us into one final storm. Before we begin, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories about courage, second chances, and the loyal companions who stay when the rest of the world walks away. Ranger would not leave the wall. The storm had been beating against Gull Rock Island for nearly 6 hours, hard enough to make the old rescue station tremble on its stone foundation. Wind came off the Atlantic in long, furious blows. Rain struck the windows like handfuls of gravel. Somewhere beneath the building, black water slammed against the cliffs and exploded upward in white sheets. I had heard storms make strange sounds before. I had heard doors moan like wounded men. I had heard pipes knock inside empty houses. I had heard wind squeeze through cracks so narrow it sounded like someone whispering. But this was different. This sound came from inside the wall. Ranger stood in the abandoned radio room with his nose pressed against a rusted steel panel. His gray muzzle was wet, his ears were forward, every muscle in his old body had gone still. He was 13 years old, retired, half deaf in his left ear, and stiff through the hips whenever the weather turned cold. But in that moment, he looked exactly as he had during our last deployment together. Focused, certain, dangerously calm. I crossed the room slowly, holding an oil lantern in one hand and a crowbar in the other. The station had lost power before sunset. The emergency generator had coughed twice, rattled like a bucket of loose bolts, and died. There was no cellular service on Gull Rock during good weather. In a storm like this, the island might as well have been 50 miles out to sea. "Back away, partner." Ranger ignored me. His nose moved along the edge of the panel. Then he lifted one paw and struck the steel once. Twice, a third time. The sound echoed through the room. Behind the wall, something answered. Metallic click. Then a low hiss. Ranger stepped back. I raised the lantern. For several seconds, there was nothing but wind and rain. Then a human voice came through the wall. Thin, broken. Almost too faint to understand. "Mayday." I stopped breathing. The voice dissolved into static. Then it returned. "This is Rescue Boat 7. We have children aboard." The transmission cut off. Ranger looked at me. I stared at the steel panel. The Gull Rock Rescue Station had been abandoned for more than 40 years. Its radio equipment had been removed before I ever set foot on the island. There should not have been electricity inside that wall. There should not have been a working transmitter, and there should not have been a voice calling for help from a rescue boat that no longer existed. The message came again. This time, beneath the static, I heard something else. 3 heavy knocks, a pause, then 3 more, not from a speaker. From behind the wall itself, Ranger lowered his head and growled. I had heard that growl only twice before. Both times, someone had been waiting on the other side of a door with a weapon. I tightened my grip on the crowbar. Lightning flashed outside. For one white second, the radio room became perfectly clear. Peeling paint, salt-stained windows, an overturned chair, water spreading beneath the door. Ranger standing between me and the steel panel. Then darkness returned. The voice whispered one final sentence. "They left us here." The transmission died. What happened next began 6 weeks earlier, when I was still living in my truck and pretending that was a choice. My name is Caleb Mercer. I served 26 years in the United States Navy. Most of those years were spent in places that never appeared on postcards and doing work that rarely made it into official reports. I was a Navy SEAL. That title used to open doors. Later in life, it mostly made people lower their voices when they asked whether I had ever killed anyone. I never answered that question. Some memories should not be used to satisfy curiosity. I was 72 years old when I came to Gull Rock Island. I owned 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, an old field coat, a toolbox, and a dark blue pickup with more rust than paint. I also had Ranger. That meant I still had the only thing I could not replace. Ranger had been trained as a military working dog. He had learned to detect explosives, track human scent, enter buildings ahead of armed men, and remain calm while the world came apart around him. He had saved my life in Yemen. I had saved his 3 days later. After that, the paperwork called us handler and canine. We knew better. We were family. The rest of my family had become more complicated. My wife, Eleanor, had died 11 months earlier. Cancer took her slowly, which people sometimes describe as a blessing because it gives everyone time to prepare. That is something people say when they have never watched the person they love become smaller every week. There was nothing merciful about it. Eleanor had been stronger than I was. She knew how to sit in silence without making it uncomfortable. She knew when my hands were shaking before I did. She could pull me out of a memory with nothing more than the touch of her fingers against my wrist. Ranger learned from her. During the final month of her life, he slept beside the couch where her hospital bed had been placed. He refused food unless she told him to eat. When pain made her cry, he rested his head beneath her hand and stayed there until she slept. On the morning she died, Ranger woke me before sunrise. He stood beside my chair and made one quiet sound. Not a bark, not a whine, a sound I had never heard from him before and have never heard since. I crossed the room. Eleanor was gone. After the funeral, our house became too quiet. Every room held a version of her, her gardening gloves beside the back door, her reading glasses on the kitchen counter, a coffee cup with a small crack near the handle, a yellow raincoat she had owned for more than 30 years. People told me not to make major decisions while grieving. I made every major decision I could. I sold the house. I gave away the furniture. I packed what remained into my truck and drove north. My daughter, Rebecca, wanted me to live near her family outside Boston. She had a husband, 2 grown children, a demanding job, and a spare room that she kept calling mine. I could hear kindness in her voice. I could also hear fear. She was afraid I would disappear. She was right. The last conversation we had before I left did not end well. "You cannot keep running every time something hurts," she said. "I am not running." "Then what are you doing?" I looked through the windshield at Ranger waiting in the passenger seat. Moving. Rebecca folded her arms. She had inherited that expression from her mother, the one that said she had already seen through every excuse I was planning to use. "You barely sleep. You forget to eat. You have not answered your telephone in 4 days." I answered today. Because I came here, I had no response. She stepped closer. For a moment, she was not 44 years old. She was 10, standing in the kitchen after I missed another birthday because the Navy had sent me somewhere I could not discuss. "Dad, I already lost Mom." The anger left her voice. "That made it worse. I cannot lose you because you are too proud to let anyone stay close." I wanted to tell her pride had nothing to do with it. I wanted to explain that every room in her house would have an exit I had not chosen, footsteps I did not recognize, and grandchildren trying to sleep while an old man woke from nightmares. I wanted to tell her that grief had made me feel dangerous to be around, not because I would hurt anyone, but because sorrow spread. Instead, I said the cruelest thing that came to mind. "You have your own life. Go live it." Her face changed. She nodded once, then she walked away. I left before sunset. For the next 7 months, Ranger and I traveled without a destination. We followed the coast through towns where nobody knew us. I repaired fences, cleaned fishing boats, replaced porch steps, and sharpened tools for cash. Some nights we stayed in cheap motels. Most nights we slept in the truck. I told myself the arrangement suited me. Ranger never argued. But he watched me. Dogs know when a man is lying, especially when the man is lying to himself. By early October, the money was almost gone. The truck needed a new transmission. My left knee had started swelling after long days of work. Ranger moved more slowly each morning. Winter was coming. We were parked outside a diner in Rockport, Maine, when a woman named Margaret Bell knocked on the passenger window. Ranger lifted his head. I reached beneath my coat out of habit, then remembered I had not carried a weapon in years. The woman stepped back and raised both hands. She looked to be in her late 60s. Silver hair, red scarf, rubber boots covered in mud. "Caleb Mercer?" I opened the door but stayed seated. "On what?" "Who is asking?" She smiled. "Daniel Bell's sister." The name hit me harder than it should have. Daniel Bell had served beside me during my first years with the teams. He was tall, loud, and incapable of entering a room without telling a story. He had also been dead for 23 years. How did you find me? Rebecca, I looked away. Margaret noticed but did not apologize. She said, you might be somewhere along the Maine coast. She also said you would refuse help if anyone called it help. That sounds like her, so I am not offering help. Margaret pointed toward the diner. I am offering breakfast and a job. 10 minutes later, we sat in a booth beside a window overlooking the harbor. Ranger lay beneath the table. Margaret pushed a folder toward me. On the cover was a photograph of a white wooden building standing on a cliff above the ocean. A narrow tower rose from one end. The windows were boarded. The roof sagged in the middle. Gull Rock Rescue Station, she said. I opened the folder. Coast Guard? Before that, the original station was built by the United States Life-Saving Service. It was expanded during the war and used until the 1970s. What happened to it? The government sold it. After that, it passed through several owners. My father bought it with 2 partners because they wanted to turn it into a maritime museum. They never did know. One partner died. The other disappeared into Florida. My father kept paying the taxes until he died, and now it belongs to you. For another 2 months, she slid a second photograph across the table. This one showed architectural plans for a resort, glass buildings, private docks, luxury cabins. The island is being sold to North Star Coastal Development, she said. They plan to demolish the station before winter. I looked again at the original photograph. Why do you need me? The insurance company requires someone to remain on the property until the sale closes. The last caretaker quit. Why? He said the island was haunted. I waited for her to smile. She did not. What did he hear? Voices in the radio room, footsteps in the boat bay, a distress bell ringing when there was no wind. Old buildings make noise. That is what I told him. Did you believe it? Margaret stirred her coffee. I believe he was frightened. That was not an answer. She continued, the job lasts 8 weeks. You would have a roof, heat, food deliveries, and enough pay to repair your truck. Ranger is welcome. I closed the folder. You asked Rebecca to find me for this. Not exactly. What does that mean? Margaret looked through the window toward the harbor. Daniel mentioned you in his letters. I had not expected that. He said you were the only man he trusted when conditions turned bad. He said you noticed what other people missed. Daniel said many things. He said one more. She looked directly at me. He said you never abandoned your people. Ranger shifted beneath the table. My appetite disappeared. Margaret must have seen something in my face because she lowered her voice. I am sorry. I did not mean to use my brother's memory against you. You did, yes. At least you are honest. I am desperate. There it was, not charity, not duty, desperation, that I understood. What is on the island that worries you? She hesitated. The development company sent a survey crew last month. One of the workers broke into a sealed storage room. The next morning, all 3 men left the island. What did they find? They would not say. Did you report it? To whom? The company claimed the crew had a scheduling conflict. The sheriff said no crime had been committed. Was anything taken? I do not know. I studied the plans again. Who controls access? North Star has a key. I have a key. The supply captain has one. And now you want to give one to me. Yes, I looked down at Ranger. His eyes were open, watching, waiting. He had always known before I did when a decision had already been made. When do we leave? The boat to Gull Rock departed the following morning. Captain Owen Pike operated the supply vessel, a 40-foot workboat named Mercy Jane. He was a broad man with a weathered face and a beard that looked permanently wet. He watched Ranger step aboard. That dog bite? Only when disappointed. Owen stared at me. I stared back. Then he laughed. Margaret said you were cheerful. She lies. The harbor fell behind us. The ocean widened. Gull Rock Island appeared through the fog after nearly an hour. It was smaller than I expected. A dark spine of stone rising from cold water, covered in bent spruce trees and tall brown grass. The rescue station stood near the eastern cliff. From the sea, it looked less like a building and more like something clinging to the island. White paint peeled from the siding. One chimney leaned slightly toward the water. The old observation tower faced the open Atlantic. Below it, a stone ramp descended into a boat bay carved into the cliff. Ranger stood at the bow, nose lifted. The wind pulled at his fur. As we approached the dock, his posture changed. His head lowered. His ears moved forward. I noticed. Owen noticed me noticing. Something wrong? Not yet. The dock groaned beneath our weight. Ranger stepped onto the island first. He walked 10 feet, stopped, and looked toward the station. Not curious, alert, the same way he used to look at buildings before an entry. I followed his gaze. One upper window was open. Margaret had told me every window was boarded and locked. Owen, I see it. Anybody supposed to be here? No. We left the supplies on the dock. I took a flashlight and moved toward the station with Ranger beside me. The front door remained locked. No damage around the frame. The grass near the steps had been flattened recently, though the ground was too hard to hold a clear print. I unlocked the door. The smell came first. Salt mildew. Old wood. Something metallic beneath it. The entrance opened into a narrow hall. Hooks lined one wall where rescue crews had once hung heavy coats. Faded names had been carved into the wood. Ranger moved ahead. His nails clicked softly against the floor. I checked each room. Kitchen, office, bunk room. Equipment storage, empty. Dust lay across most surfaces, but not all of them. A clean line crossed the table in the office, as if someone had recently dragged a box away. In the kitchen sink, I found a wet match. The upper floor held 6 small bedrooms and the observation tower. The open window was at the end of the hall. Its latch had been forced. Rain had darkened the floor beneath it. Ranger entered the room, circled once, and stopped near the wall. He sniffed, then sneezed. I crouched beside him. A chemical odor lingered near the baseboard. Fresh paint thinner. Someone had used it recently. But there was no new paint. Behind us, a floorboard creaked. I turned. The hallway was empty. Ranger moved instantly, placing himself between me and the doorway. We waited. No footsteps, no movement. Then something struck the floor below us. One heavy impact. The sound traveled through the station. Owen called from outside. "Caleb, we are fine." I was not certain that was true. We searched the lower floor again. Nothing had fallen. Nothing had moved. When we returned to the entrance, Ranger stopped beside a closed door beneath the stairs. The door was secured with a steel chain and a newer brass padlock. "What is in there?" I asked. Owen had entered behind us. "Old radio room." Margaret said the equipment was removed. It was. Who added the lock? He examined it, not me. I touched the brass. No corrosion, no salt buildup. Recent. Ranger sniffed the gap beneath the door. His body stiffened. Then came a faint sound from the other side, a single click. Like a relay switching on. Owen took one step backward. You heard that?" "Yes, old buildings make noise. That is what frightened people say when they need the world to make sense." He looked at me. "You opening it?" "Not without knowing who locked it." We left it alone that first day. That decision bothered Ranger. While Owen unloaded food and fuel, the dog returned to the chain door again and again. Each time he pressed his nose against the wood. Each time he listened. Before leaving, Owen handed me a marine radio. Channel 16 for emergencies. Channel 9 reaches me during daylight. Weather turns fast out here. "When is the next supply run?" 4 days. He looked toward the station. "Could make it sooner." "I will be fine." I was talking to the dog. Ranger watched the boat pull away. The sound of the engine faded. Then the island became quiet, not peaceful quiet. There is a difference. Peace allows a man to lower his guard. Quiet makes him listen harder. I spent the afternoon making the station livable. The kitchen stove worked after I cleaned the fuel line. 2 downstairs rooms remained dry. A rainwater tank supplied the plumbing, though the water tasted faintly of iron. I chose a bunk room near the rear exit. Old habits. Ranger chose the floor beside the door. Older habits. At sunset, the fog returned. It wrapped around the station until the windows showed nothing but gray. I heated canned stew and poured Ranger's food into a metal bowl. He ate half, then stopped. His head turned toward the hallway. From beneath the stairs came 3 slow knocks. I set down my spoon. Ranger stood. The knocks came again. A pause. 3. I took the flashlight and moved toward the radio room. The chain remained in place. The brass lock hung motionless. "Is someone in there?" My voice sounded foolish the moment it left my mouth. No answer. I placed my ear against the door. At first I heard nothing. Then soft, distant, unmistakable. Ranger gave a low growl. The static stopped. Behind me the distress bell rang. The sound exploded through the station. Ranger spun. I moved toward the front hall. A large brass bell hung near the entrance, connected to an old rope that disappeared through the ceiling. The rope was swinging. There was no wind inside. The front door was still locked. I grabbed the rope and stopped it. The bell was silent. From the radio room came a woman's voice. "Please respond." I turned. The words had been faint but clear. "Please respond. We are taking water." I moved back to the chained door. "Identify yourself." Nothing. I waited. Ranger pressed against my leg. Then the woman spoke again. Not through the door, not through a speaker. Directly behind me, "Caleb." I turned so fast my shoulder struck the wall. The hallway was empty. Ranger barked once, his eyes fixed on the staircase. A shadow moved across the upper landing. I ran up the steps. Ranger followed. Every room was empty. Every window was closed, except the one with the broken latch. The fog outside had thickened. I leaned toward the opening and shone my light across the roof. A man stood beside the observation tower. He wore a dark raincoat. His face was hidden by the fog. "Stop," he turned toward me. For 1 second I saw something pale in his hand, a folder, or an envelope. Then he stepped behind the tower. I climbed through the window. The roof was slick beneath my boots. Wind pushed against me. Ranger remained inside, barking from the opening. I reached the tower. No one was there. A ladder ran down the facade of the roof. I looked over the edge. The ground below was empty. Then I saw the rear door hanging open. By the time I reached the lower floor, the intruder was gone. Mud marked the hallway. The tracks led from the rear entrance to the chained radio room. The padlock lay on the floor, cut cleanly through. The door stood open. Inside, the room was smaller than I expected. Dust covered an old desk. Empty equipment racks lined the walls. Thick cables had been severed near the ceiling. Nothing had power. Nothing should have produced a voice. Ranger entered and moved directly toward a rusted steel panel at the far end of the room. He sniffed along its edge, then he sat. On the floor beside him lay a small strip of paper. I picked it up. The paper was old and yellowed, torn from a larger page. 3 words had been written across it in blue ink. "Do not listen." Beneath those words was a date, November 27th, 1968. Ranger struck the steel panel with one paw. A hollow sound answered. Behind the wall something clicked. Then a man began to scream. The sound lasted less than 2 seconds. It ended with a burst of static. Ranger looked at me. Outside, somewhere beyond the fog, a boat engine started. I ran to the front window. A black vessel moved away from the island without lights. It vanished into the gray before I could read the name. I called Owen on the marine radio. No response. I tried the emergency channel. Only static. Then a different voice came through the radio in my hand. Calm, male. Close enough to sound as though he were standing beside me. "Leave the wall closed, Commander Mercer." I had not been called commander in more than 20 years. "Who is this?" The voice ignored the question. "The island does not belong to you." I looked at Ranger. The dog had returned to the steel panel. His nose moved along a narrow seam near the floor. "Then come back and tell me yourself." A soft laugh came through the radio. "You will not last the week." The transmission ended. That night I pushed a heavy table against the rear door. I checked every window twice. I placed empty glass bottles along the stairs and tied the distress bell rope to the front latch. Ranger watched me prepare the station. He understood the language of readiness. Before sleeping, I called Rebecca. The satellite telephone connected on the 4th attempt. She answered immediately. "Dad?" For a moment I could not speak. I had imagined this conversation many times. In every version I apologized. In every version I explained myself. When I finally heard her voice, all I managed was, "I am working on an island." Silence. Then she laughed once, not because it was funny, because it was exactly the kind of sentence she expected from me. "Are you safe?" I looked toward Ranger. He was staring down the hallway at the open radio room. "Yes," it was my second lie of the day. "Are you eating?" "Yes, my third." "Is Ranger with you?" "He is." "Put me on speaker." I did. Rebecca spoke his name. Ranger turned toward the telephone. His tail moved once. That small movement hurt more than I expected. "I miss you both," she said. I closed my eyes. "We miss you too." The words came out before fear could stop them. Rebecca became quiet. "Dad, what is wrong?" Behind me the distress bell rang. Ranger surged to his feet. "I have to go, Dad. I will call tomorrow." "Do not hang up," but I already had. The front door remained closed. The rope was still tied to the latch, yet the bell continued ringing. Slowly, deliberately, one strike every few seconds. I followed Ranger into the radio room. The steel panel vibrated with each sound, not because of the bell, because something behind it was striking from the other side. Ranger began scratching at the seam. Easy. He scratched harder. Rust fell from the panel. One of his nails split. Blood appeared against the steel. I pulled him back. He fought me for the first time in years. Not attacking, insisting, trying to reach whatever was behind that wall. Then the voice came again, a weak, distant, buried beneath decades of static. This is Rescue Boat 7. We have 9 survivors aboard. 4 are children. The message repeated. A man spoke over her. Turn back. That is a direct order, the woman answered. They will die. The transmission broke apart. Then came the sound of waves. Shouting, a child crying, a powerful crash, silence. Ranger stopped struggling. The entire room became still. One final voice emerged from behind the wall, the same male voice that had spoken through my radio, but younger, terrified. Sink the boat before they reach shore. I stared at the panel. Ranger leaned against my leg, breathing hard. Someone had hidden a recording inside the station. Someone else had returned to make certain it stayed hidden. And whatever happened on Gull Rock Island in 1968 had not ended at sea. It had followed us into that room. I wrapped Ranger's bleeding paw. Then I picked up the crowbar. The storm outside was still 2 days away. But inside the rescue station, the past had already begun breaking through the wall. I did not open the wall that night. Every instinct I had told me to get inside before whoever owned the black boat returned. Experience told me something else. The man who rushes through an unknown door usually gives the advantage to the person waiting behind it. I moved Ranger into the kitchen, cleaned the blood from his paw, and wrapped it with gauze from the station's first aid cabinet. The cut was shallow, but one nail had split close to the quick. He watched the hallway while I worked. You found it, I told him. You do not have to tear the building apart yourself. His amber eyes remained fixed on the radio room. Ranger had never cared much for reassurance. He trusted actions, so I showed him mine. I carried every tool I could find into the radio room. A hammer, 2 crowbars, a hand drill, a rusted wrench, an old carpenter's level. I placed them on the desk, then measured the steel panel. The wall was 8 feet wide. The room on the other side should have opened into the equipment storage area. It did not. I checked the exterior dimensions of the station twice. Then a third time. There was a space between the radio room and the western wall that did not appear on Margaret's floor plan. A hidden room, roughly 6 feet wide and 14 feet long. The person who built it had not wanted visitors. The person who returned to the island wanted it kept that way. I spent the rest of the night listening. There were no more voices. No knocks. No screaming. Only rain against the roof and the occasional scrape of Ranger shifting his injured paw. Just before dawn, the marine radio crackled. Gull Rock, this is Mercy Jane. Caleb, do you copy? I took the handset. This is Gull Rock. Owen Pike exhaled loudly. Thank God. I have been trying to reach you since midnight. My radio was blocked. Blocked by what? That is one of several questions. I walked to the front window. The fog had lifted enough for me to see the dock. The ocean remained rough, but the worst of the weather had passed. Did you see a black vessel near the island yesterday? There was a pause. What cabin? Twin engines. No running lights. Another pause, longer this time. Owen, I know a boat like that. Whose? North Star Coastal Development uses one for survey work. That did not surprise me. Who runs it? Man named Adrian Voss. I waited. When Owen did not continue, I said, tell me the rest. He is North Star's regional director, former military contractor. Security work, mostly. At least that is what people say. People say many things. They say he does not like delays. Does he know I am here? He signed off on the caretaker requirement. So yes. Caleb, what happened? I looked toward the radio room. Someone entered the station. Are you hurt? No. Ranger, he cut his paw. Owen's voice hardened. I am coming over. Bring Margaret. That could take an hour. Bring her anyway. I ended the transmission. Ranger lifted his head. The company knows the room exists, I said. Now we find out whether Margaret does. Owen arrived shortly after sunrise. The Mercy Jane struck the dock hard enough to throw spray over the rail. Margaret stood beside him in a yellow raincoat, one hand gripping the cabin frame. She came ashore carrying a leather document case. Owen carried a shotgun. I looked at it. He shrugged. Old buildings make noise. Margaret noticed Ranger's bandaged paw before she noticed anything else. What happened? He tried to open a wall. That sounds like Ranger. You know him well? No. I know determined men tend to keep determined dogs. We entered the station. I showed them the cut padlock, the muddy tracks, and the scrap of paper. Margaret read the warning twice. Do not listen. The date beneath it seemed to drain the color from her face. November 27th, she whispered. You recognize it. She walked into the radio room. Her eyes moved over the empty equipment racks and stopped on the steel panel. My father used to talk about that date. What did he say? Almost nothing. That is not talking. Margaret removed her scarf. He drank every year on that night. He would sit alone in his workshop with the radio playing. If anyone asked why he became angry, was he stationed here? He volunteered at the station as a young man, not as an official rescuer. He repaired engines and delivered supplies. How old was he? 17. Owen lowered the shotgun. You never told me that. You never asked. I pointed toward the hidden wall. Did your father know about the room? Margaret did not answer immediately. She opened her document case and removed an old envelope. Inside was a photograph. 7 men stood in front of the Gull Rock station. Most wore heavy rescue coats. A young woman stood among them, her dark hair tied beneath a wool cap. She looked no older than 25. The men stared at the camera. The woman looked toward the sea. On the back, someone had written several names. One had been crossed out so violently that the pen had nearly torn through the paper. Who is she? I asked. Margaret touched the crossed-out name. Evelyn Shaw. The name meant nothing to me. She captained Rescue Boat 7, Margaret continued. At least that is what my father claimed. You said the official crews were men. They were, but she commanded a rescue boat. She was not supposed to. Owen leaned closer to the photograph. I have heard that name. Where? My grandfather used to call the Eastern Shoal Shaw's grave. Margaret looked toward the window. The official report says, Rescue Boat 7 sank during an unauthorized training exercise. All 6 crew members were lost. The recording mentioned 9 survivors, I said. 4 children. She closed her eyes. My father said the report was a lie. The station seemed to settle around us. Wood creaked in the ceiling. Water moved through pipes. Ranger rose and walked toward the steel panel. Margaret watched him. What did you hear last night? I told her. The distress call, the order to turn back. The child crying, the command to sink the boat. I did not soften any part of it. When I finished, Margaret gripped the desk with both hands. My father tried to tell people, she said. Nobody believed him. What exactly did he claim? That a passenger vessel struck the shoal during a storm. The official crew refused to launch because the sea was too violent. Evelyn took Rescue Boat 7 without authorization. With 6 crew members, 5, my father went with them. I looked at the photograph again. Your father survived. Yes, how? He never said. Ranger struck the steel panel. Once, Margaret flinched. I held up the torn warning. Did your father write this? She studied the handwriting. I think so. Then he returned here. Perhaps recently? He died 9 years ago. I placed the note on the desk. Someone knew enough about his warning to use the same room. Owen moved toward the panel. How do we open it? I showed him the narrow seam near the floor. There are no hinges on this side. The bolts are probably internal. Can we cut through? Yes. Margaret stepped between us and the wall. Wait, I had seen that look before, fear dressed as caution. What are you not telling me? She looked at Owen, then at me. The sale contract gives North Star immediate control if the building is declared unsafe. Meaning? If we damage a structural wall, they can take possession before the closing date. Convenient. They have already filed 2 reports, claiming the station is unstable. Owen tapped the steel panel. This is not structural. You know that, I know that, their attorneys will say otherwise. I picked up the crowbar. Then we do not damage the wall. How? We find the entrance. For the next 4 hours we searched the station. Ranger did most of the real work. He moved from room to room with his nose close to the floor, occasionally returning to the hidden wall. In the equipment bay, he became interested in an old cabinet, bolted to the floor. Owen and I dragged it aside. Behind it was nothing but rough boards. Ranger scratched at the base. I removed 1 plank. Cold air touched my face. A narrow shaft ran behind the wall. Too small for a person, large enough for cables. I shone the flashlight inside. Copper wires disappeared downward, not upward toward the old antenna. Down. The radio room was connected to something below the station. We followed the cable route into the boat bay. The bay occupied the lowest level of the building, where rescue boats had once launched down a stone ramp into the sea. Salt coated the walls. Iron hooks hung from overhead beams. An old winch stood near the center, its gears red with rust. The tide was rising beneath the lower doors. Each wave pushed black water several feet into the bay before sliding back. Ranger limped toward the western wall. I tried to stop him. He ignored me. At the base of the winch, he sniffed a round iron plate set into the floor. Owen scraped away decades of dirt with his boot. Letters appeared. Cable access. The bolts turned more easily than expected. Someone had opened the plate recently. Beneath it, iron rungs descended into darkness. A faint current of air rose from below, along with the smell of fuel. Fresh fuel. Owen knelt beside the opening. This shaft is not on any plan I have seen. Margaret stared down. My father mentioned tunnels. What kind of tunnels? I asked. During the Second World War, the Navy used part of the island for coastal observation. He said they built storage chambers into the rock. Why were they sealed? He never said. I aimed the flashlight downward. The ladder descended 20 feet to a concrete floor. A cable ran along the wall, so did a fresh boot print. Someone was below us. I touched Ranger's shoulder. Stay. He remained beside Margaret. He did not like it. Neither did I. Owen slung the shotgun behind him. You first or me? I am older. That is not an answer. It is the only advantage I have. I climbed down. The shaft opened into a narrow concrete passage beneath the station. Water dripped from the ceiling. Electrical cables followed the wall, some ancient, some new. A red light glowed in the distance. Not bright, just enough to prove there was power. Owen joined me. We moved quietly. The passage ended at a steel door. A modern keypad had been mounted beside it. North Star had installed equipment inside a hidden military tunnel on property it did not yet own. I studied the keypad. 4 numbers showed more wear than the others. Owen whispered, "Can you open it?" "Eventually." "How long is eventually?" "Longer than we have." From the other side came the sound of a printer. Then footsteps. I moved beside the door. Owen raised the shotgun. The lock clicked. The door opened inward. A man stepped through carrying a hard plastic case. He wore dark work clothes and a North Star jacket. He saw me. His right hand moved toward his waistband. I caught his wrist before he reached whatever was there. He drove his shoulder into my chest. Age does not make a man helpless. It does make the floor arrive faster. We went down hard. Pain shot through my left knee. The man struck me once across the jaw. I rolled, pulled him off balance, and locked his arm behind him. Owen aimed the shotgun. "Stop moving." The man stopped. I searched him. He carried a folding knife, a telephone, and a compact pistol. No identification. I took the weapon. "Who are you?" He smiled against the concrete. "You are trespassing." Interesting place to make that argument. This tunnel belongs to North Star. The island does not. It will. Owen took the plastic case. Inside were portable hard drives, recording equipment, and several reels of old magnetic tape. Each reel had been labeled by hand: Rescue Boat 7. Weather log, survivor statements, final transmission. Margaret's father had not merely hidden a recording. He had preserved an archive. The man beneath me began to laugh. "You have no idea what those are." "Then explain them." "They are contaminated evidence." "Contaminated by what?" "Time, moisture, delusion." I tightened the pressure on his arm. His laughter stopped. "Who ordered you to remove them?" He said nothing. Adrian Voss. His body changed, barely. But enough. I had my answer. From the shaft behind us came Ranger's bark. One sharp warning. Then Margaret shouted my name. I released the man, stood and turned. A figure appeared at the far end of the passage, tall. Dark raincoat, pale. Adrian Voss. He held Margaret by the arm. A short-barreled weapon rested against her side. Ranger stood several feet away, teeth exposed. His injured paw shook beneath him. "Call off the dog," Voss said. I recognized the voice from the radio, older than the recording, calmer than the man who had ordered a boat sunk on, but the same rhythm, the same clipped control. "Ranger," I said. The dog looked at me. "Hold." He stayed where he was. Voss studied him. I read his service record. That angered me more than the weapon. "You have been busy." "I like to understand obstacles." "You broke into the station." "I entered company property." "Not yet. Paperwork is a temporary condition." Owen aimed the shotgun. Voss pressed the weapon closer to Margaret. "Lower it." Owen hesitated. Margaret said, "Do not." Voss twisted her arm. She gasped. I raised one hand toward Owen. He lowered the barrel. The man I had restrained rose behind me. I heard him reach for the pistol that was no longer there. I turned just enough for him to see it in my hand. He stopped. Voss smiled. You still move well, Commander. Not well enough to enjoy compliments. You should have left when I told you. You should have chosen a quieter island. His eyes shifted toward the case of tapes. For the first time his calm expression cracked. You need to give those back. To whom? They are North Star property. They were here before North Star existed. Ownership is not always about age, neither is guilt. The passage went silent. Voss looked at me differently. You think you understand what happened. I know someone ordered Rescue Boat 7 sunk. You heard a damaged recording. I heard your voice. That landed. Margaret stopped struggling. Owen looked from Voss to me. The man behind us moved toward the door. Voss said nothing for several seconds. Then he smiled again. My grandfather's voice. The resemblance suddenly made sense. Who was he? Commander Silas Voss, officer in charge of Gull Rock Station. Margaret stared at him. Your grandfather signed the report. He preserved the station's reputation. He buried 6 people. He prevented panic by killing rescuers. Voss's expression hardened. You have heard fragments, nothing more. Then let us hear the rest. No, one word, no hesitation, no performance. Whatever was on those tapes frightened him. Not because it was false, because it was complete. Ranger shifted his weight. Voss noticed. Keep the dog still. He is still. His eyes are not. Ranger had not been watching Voss. He was watching the ceiling. A drop of water fell near my boot. Then another. The tunnel trembled. Owen looked upward. Tide surge. Voss glanced toward passage entrance. That was all Ranger needed. He lunged, not at Voss. At the overhead light, his body struck the hanging cable. The red bulb shattered. Darkness swallowed the tunnel. Margaret screamed. A weapon fired. The sound became enormous inside the concrete passage. I moved toward the muzzle flash. My shoulder struck Voss in the chest. We hit the wall. The weapon fell. Owen grabbed Margaret. The other man ran through the steel door and sealed it behind him. Voss drove an elbow into my neck. I caught his coat, turned, and forced him against the ladder shaft. He was younger, stronger. I had surprise and 40 years of experience being underestimated. Ranger growled somewhere in the dark. Caleb, Margaret shouted. Water rushed along the floor. The tide had forced its way through a lower drainage gate. Within seconds it rose over my boots. Voss stopped fighting. Not from surrender. Fear. He looked toward the black water. This tunnel floods. How fast? Faster than you can climb. We found the ladder by touch. Owen sent Margaret first. Voss reached for the tapes. I caught his wrist. Leave them. They cannot stay here. They are coming with me. Water rose to my knees. The current pushed hard through the passage. Ranger stood at the ladder, refusing to climb before me. I lifted the case above my head and shoved it toward Owen. Take it. He carried the archive upward. Margaret reached the boat bay. Voss tried to follow. I blocked him. Ranger first. He is a dog. He is my partner. Voss looked into my face and saw I would let the tunnel fill before changing my mind. He stepped aside. Ranger climbed slowly, favoring his injured paw. The water reached my waist. A powerful surge slammed me against the wall. My knee folded. For 1 second I went under. Cold water closed over my head. The tunnel disappeared. I was somewhere else, a flooded chamber in Yemen. Smoke trapped near the ceiling, gunfire outside. Ranger younger, bleeding from the shoulder, pulling at my vest while seawater rose around us. The memory locked around my chest. I could not move. Then teeth closed gently around my sleeve. Ranger. Not the young dog from Yemen, the old dog on Gull Rock. He had climbed back down. He pulled. I found the ladder. Found the rung. Found the present. Together we climbed. Owen dragged me through the hatch. Voss emerged seconds later. Water exploded from the opening behind him. We sealed the iron plate. Everyone stood breathing hard. Ranger leaned against my leg. I rested a hand on his neck. You came back. His tail moved once. Voss sat against the wall, soaked and furious. Owen held the shotgun on him. Margaret opened the case. The tapes were dry. Voss watched her. You do not know what you are protecting. My father's truth. Your father was a coward. Margaret crossed the room and struck him across the face. The sound echoed through the boat bay. Voss looked almost surprised. My father was 17 years old, she said. He went into a storm while your grandfather stayed on shore. He survived because my grandfather saved him. Then why did he hide the recordings? Voss said nothing. We took him upstairs. The storm had cleared enough for the marine radio to work. Owen contacted the county sheriff. Voss sat at the kitchen table with his wrists tied using rescue line. He remained calm. Too calm. You think the sheriff will arrest me? He asked. You entered a locked building with a weapon. I came to inspect unsafe property. You held Margaret at gunpoint. You attacked me in a dark tunnel. Owen saw everything. Voss glanced at him. Captain Pike has contracts with North Star. Owen's jaw tightened. Not anymore. That boat payment says otherwise. The words struck their target. Voss understood leverage. Mortgage payments, business permits, legal fees. He did not need everyone to love him, only to need him. He turned to Margaret. Your sale agreement contains a confidentiality clause. I never signed one. Your father did. My father is dead. His estate is not. Then he looked at me. And you have no legal claim to anything in that case. Maybe not. Then hand it over. No, North Star will destroy you. I almost laughed. You are late. Something in my answer unsettled him. A man who has already lost his home, his wife, his career, and most of his future is difficult to threaten with ruin. Voss understood that. For the first time he looked at Ranger, not as an animal, as the reason I was not entirely alone. The sheriff arrived near noon. He brought 2 deputies and a company attorney. That told me everything. The attorney spoke before anyone asked him a question. Mr. Voss was conducting an authorized safety inspection. With a loaded weapon, I asked. He holds a valid permit. Inside a hidden tunnel. The tunnel is included in North Star's preliminary access rights. Margaret stepped forward. That is a lie. The attorney opened a folder. He showed her a signed document. Her face changed. My father's signature. Correct. He signed this 20 years ago. It remains binding. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. That meant he had already decided discomfort was the worst consequence he was willing to face. Voss stood. His hands had been untied. What about the break-in? I asked. The sheriff examined the cut lock. Mr. Voss says the lock belonged to North Star. It did not. Can you prove that? I could not. What about the threat over the radio? Do you have a recording? I did not. What about the gunshot in the tunnel? The sheriff looked at Voss. Voss opened his coat. No weapon. It had disappeared during the flood, or one of his men had removed it. The sheriff turned to me. Do you have the pistol you took from the other man? I placed it on the table. The attorney smiled faintly. Voss said, that belongs to the caretaker. The room became quiet. He was framing me, not dramatically, efficiently. The sheriff examined the weapon. Registered owner is North Star Security. Voss looked surprised. For half a second, genuinely surprised, Owen began to laugh. You should know which lies your attorney plans to use. The attorney's face hardened. The sheriff took possession of the pistol. He did not arrest Voss. He did not arrest me. He called it an unresolved property dispute and warned everyone to remain separated until the county reviewed the claims. Voss left with the attorney. Before boarding the black boat, he turned toward me. The demolition crew arrives in 12 days. Margaret stepped beside me. The sale is not final. It does not need to be. He looked at the station. One structural failure is enough. The boat pulled away. Ranger watched until it vanished. That afternoon, Margaret spread the tapes across the kitchen table. There were 31 reels. Some had dates. Others carried only names. Evelyn Shaw, Thomas Bell, 9 survivors. The last order. One small reel had no label. A red thread had been tied around it. Owen found an old tape machine in the observation tower. The belts had rotted. The heads were corroded. Repairing it would take time we did not have. Margaret called a retired radio technician named Samuel Reed, who lived on the mainland. He agreed to come the next morning before sunset. Owen left to collect him and bring it. Margaret stayed. She chose the bunk room across from mine. Neither of us discussed why she did not want to be alone. That evening I called Rebecca. She answered on the first ring. You said you would call tomorrow. It is tomorrow. It has been almost a full day. I had trouble. What kind? I looked through the kitchen doorway. Margaret was cleaning one of the tape reels. Ranger slept near the stove with his bandaged paw stretched in front of him. The kind I should have told you about sooner. Rebecca became quiet. I told her about the island. Not everything, enough. When I finished, she said, Leave, I cannot. You mean you will not? That too. Why? I looked at Ranger. He had opened his eyes. Because someone tried to erase what happened here. That is not your responsibility. No. Then why are you making it yours? I thought about Eleanor, about the hospital bed, about Rebecca standing in the driveway, about every person I had left because duty seemed easier than staying. I am tired of leaving. Rebecca did not answer for several seconds. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Then do not disappear while you stay. I will call every night, you promise? Yes. Dad, you are terrible at promises. I know that was not an apology, I know that too. A soft breath came through the telephone. Be careful. I will, and keep Ranger away from walls. I looked at his bandage. He does not follow orders anymore. He learned from you. After the call, I sat beside the stove. For the first time in many months, speaking to my daughter had not felt like entering a room filled with broken glass. Nothing had been repaired. But we had stopped pretending there was nothing to repair. That was a beginning. Near midnight, Ranger woke me. He stood beside the table where the tapes had been arranged. His nose hovered over the reel tied with red thread. Margaret entered the room wearing her father's old wool coat. What is it? I do not know. Ranger touched the reel with his nose. Then he walked to the hidden wall, back to the reel. Back to the wall. He was showing us a connection. I examined the metal spool. Something had been placed inside the center hub, a narrow roll of paper. I removed it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map of the station. The hidden room appeared behind the radio wall. A second chamber had been marked beneath the cliff. Beside it, Thomas Bell had written one sentence: Evelyn never died at sea. Margaret read the words aloud. Her hands began to shake. That is impossible, maybe. The official report listed her among the dead. Official reports can lie. Ranger moved toward the rear door. He scratched once. I opened it. Cold air entered the hall. The moon had risen above the water. The storm clouds were gone. Silver light covered the grass behind the station. Ranger stepped outside and lowered his nose. A line of footprints crossed the ground. Small, barefoot. They began at the cliff. They ended at the station door. There were no prints leading away. Margaret stood behind me. Who walks barefoot out here? I aimed the flashlight across the grass. Near the cliff, something moved. A woman in a dark coat stood beside the old observation post. Her white hair lifted in the wind. She raised one hand, not waving, warning us. Then she turned and disappeared behind the rocks. Ranger ran after her. Ranger, I followed. The ground dropped sharply near the cliff edge. Waves struck the stone below. Ranger stopped beside a rusted iron ring anchored into the rock. A rope had been tied to it. New rope. It descended over the cliff. I shone the flashlight downward, 30 feet below, hidden behind a curtain of spray. A narrow ledge led into an opening in the stone. The second chamber. Margaret gripped my arm. From inside the cave came the glow of a lantern. Then the woman's voice rose above the waves. If you found Thomas's tapes, you are already in danger. I looked down. She stood at the cave entrance, staring up at us. Who are you? I called. The woman lifted the lantern. Her face became visible, alive. My name is Evelyn Shaw. Margaret stopped breathing. The woman who had officially died more than 50 years earlier stepped deeper into the cave. And Adrian Voss is coming back before dawn. Evelyn Shaw had been dead for 57 years. At least, that was what the government record said. The woman standing beneath us looked very much alive. She held an oil lantern at the mouth of the cave while waves exploded against the rocks below. Her white hair moved in the wind. A long scar ran from her left temple to the corner of her mouth. Ranger stared down at her. He did not bark. That mattered. He had never trusted official records, but he trusted scent. Adrian Voss is coming back before dawn, Evelyn called. You can stand there asking questions, or you can climb down and survive long enough to hear the answers. Margaret looked at me. That rope cannot hold all of us. It only needs to hold one at a time. You have an injured knee. I also have 2 hands. Ranger stepped toward the cliff. No, he looked at me. You stay here. He looked down at Evelyn, then back at me. The argument was already lost. I secured a second line around his chest and shoulders. Ranger had been lowered from helicopters, pulled through windows, and carried across rivers under gunfire. A 30-foot descent should not have troubled him. Age changes the definition of simple. His injured paw shook when he placed weight on it. I went first, the rope wet and rough against my palms. Spray struck my face. The sea below rose and fell like a black animal breathing beneath the cliff. Halfway down, my left knee locked. For one dangerous second, my boot slipped. The rope cut into my hands. A memory flashed through me. A stone wall in Yemen. Smoke overhead, Ranger barking from somewhere I could not see. I forced the memory away. Not then, not there. I found the ledge and lowered myself beside Evelyn. Up close, she looked older than the light had suggested. Her face carried the thin, weathered lines of someone who had spent a lifetime near salt water. But her eyes were steady, gray, sharp, unapologetic. "You are Caleb Mercer," she said. "You know my name." Thomas wrote about Daniel Bell's friend, the SEAL who never believed the first answer. "Thomas Bell has been dead 9 years, I know." Her voice changed slightly. Not enough to become grief. Enough to prove grief had lived there. Margaret descended next. When her feet touched the ledge, she stared at Evelyn as though she were looking at a ghost. "You knew my father." Evelyn lifted the lantern. "I loved your father." Margaret's face tightened. She had come looking for history. She had found a piece of her father he had never given her. Ranger came last. I guided the rope while Margaret lowered him. His claws scraped rock. As he reached the ledge, he shook seawater from his coat, then moved directly to Evelyn. She knelt slowly. Ranger smelled her hands, her coat, and the leather pouch at her waist. Then he sat. Evelyn touched the gray fur along his muzzle. "You found the room." "He found more than that. They usually do." I looked past her into the cave. A narrow passage disappeared into darkness. The walls were reinforced with old naval concrete. Electrical wire ran along the ceiling. Someone had built a life inside the rock. "How long have you been here?" "Not continuously." "That is not an answer. You sound like Thomas." "So I have been told." "We need to move." "What is Voss bringing?" "Men, fuel, enough explosives to make the cliff collapse, and enough paperwork to call it storm damage." Margaret looked toward the station above us. "He would destroy the entire building?" "He does not need the building. He needs what is hidden beneath it to disappear." We followed her deeper into the cave. The passage widened into a chamber filled with shelves, sealed containers, tools, blankets, and canned food. A small stove burned near one wall. Maps covered a wooden table. This was no temporary hiding place. Evelyn had prepared for siege. A radio receiver sat beside the stove. Modern equipment. Battery-powered. The display showed several local marine frequencies. "You listen to us," I said. I listened to Voss. The voice through my radio was his. "Yes. What about the transmissions behind the wall?" Thomas built a loop system using the original tapes. He wanted anyone entering the hidden room to understand what they had found before they could decide what to do with it. The recording called me by name. That was Adrian. "Why frighten me instead of removing me?" "He wanted you to leave voluntarily." Dead caretakers create questions. Margaret stepped toward the shelves. Dozens of notebooks stood behind glass doors. Some looked new. Others were wrapped in cloth. My father kept coming here. For most of his life, he told me this island made him sick. It did. Then why did he return? Evelyn looked at her. Because guilt does not always make a person run away. Sometimes it chains them to the place where they failed. Margaret absorbed that in silence. I placed both hands on the table. "Start at the beginning." Evelyn shook her head. "We do not have time for the beginning." "Then start with the lie that stopped her." He sat across from me. Ranger lowered himself near my boots, but kept his head raised. Outside, waves struck the cliff. Inside, Evelyn Shaw returned to the night the world had erased her. "November 27th, 1968, she said. A passenger ferry named North Haven left the mainland carrying 18 people. Families returning after the Thanksgiving holiday. The weather warning came after departure. How bad? Winds above 60 miles an hour, freezing rain, seas high enough to hide a 2-story house." Margaret pulled out a chair. "The ferry struck the eastern shoal." "Yes, the hull opened below the waterline. Their radio operator called Gull Rock." "What did Commander Voss do?" "Silas Voss refused the launch." "Why?" "He said the rescue boat would never survive the channel." "Was he right?" Evelyn looked at me. He was not entirely wrong. That answer gave her credibility. She was not turning the past into a simple story of cowards and heroes. Rescue Boat 7 had been built for heavy weather, she continued. But one engine had a cracked cooling line. Thomas had repaired it that morning. "Silas did not trust the repair, did you?" "Yes." "Why were you at the station?" "I repaired radios." Officially, I was a civilian communications assistant. Unofficially, I trained half the men there to navigate at night. Why were you not on the crew? Because I was a woman. She said it without bitterness. The bitterness had burned away decades earlier. Only fact remained. The ferry called again, she continued. We could hear children crying over the transmitter. Silas ordered everyone to remain inside. You disobeyed. I asked for volunteers. 5. Thomas? He was the first. Evelyn looked at Margaret. Your father was 17 years old and terrified. He climbed aboard anyway. Margaret lowered her eyes. The official report said 6 people died. 6 people left the station. What happened to the ferry passengers? We reached them. Evelyn's voice softened. The North Haven was already listing. We took 9 people aboard Rescue Boat 7, 4 children, 3 women, and 2 injured crewmen. There was no room for more. You returned for the others. We tried. The stove cracked behind her. Ranger's ears moved. The ferry rolled before we could make a second pass, Evelyn said. 9 people disappeared beneath the water. Margaret covered her mouth. And Rescue Boat 7, the engine repair held. The hull did not. We struck floating wreckage on the way back. Water entered faster than we could pump it. The recording returned to me. The shouting. The child crying. The voice ordering the boat sunk. You called the station. Silas answered. He ordered you away. He ordered us to remain offshore until a Navy patrol arrived. Why? Because if we reached Gull Rock alive, everyone would know he had refused the launch. A man protecting a reputation while people froze in the dark. I had met men like that, different uniforms, same fear. What did Silas mean by sink the boat? Evelyn's scar tightened as she clenched her jaw. He ordered the station launch to ram us. Margaret stared at her. He sent another boat with 3 armed men. Did they know why? 1 did. 2 followed orders. What happened? Thomas heard the command over our radio. He warned me. We turned toward the cliff instead of the dock. The cave, yes, a hidden channel ran beneath the eastern rocks. At high tide, Rescue Boat 7 entered the cave with 9 survivors and 6 rescuers. The second boat followed, but the channel was too narrow. A wave drove it into the rock. One of the men aboard died instantly. The others abandoned the boat and climbed toward the station. Silas told the mainland both vessels had been lost, Evelyn said. He reported 18 ferry passengers and 6 unauthorized rescuers dead. But 15 of you were alive in this cave. Barely. What happened to the survivors? Silas offered them a choice. I already knew it would not be a choice. He threatened them, I said. He said they would be charged with causing the deaths of the men aboard the second launch. He said their families would be ruined. Then he promised money, new names, and transportation out of the state. All 9 agreed. 8 who refused. Evelyn looked toward the radio. A woman named Ruth Voss. Margaret leaned forward. His wife, his younger sister. The name changed the shape of the story. Ruth and her son were on the ferry, Evelyn said. The boy was 6 years old. Adrian's father, I said. Yes, Silas Voss had refused to launch a rescue boat while his own sister and nephew were drowning. Evelyn saved them. Then he erased her. What happened to Ruth? She refused the money. She said she would testify. Did she? She disappeared 3 days later, Ranger rose. He crossed the chamber and pressed his nose against a metal trunk near the wall. Evelyn watched him. What is in there? I asked. Ruth's statement. Open it. Evelyn remained seated. Why have you not released it? I tried. When? Every decade of my life. She told us about newspapers that returned her letters unopened. Attorneys who demanded payment she did not have. Government offices that said the records could not be verified. Historians who called her story impossible because the official reports were too complete. Silas Voss had not merely written a lie. He had built it carefully. He placed false wreckage along the shoreline. He bribed a medical examiner. He arranged death certificates. He paid surviving families from an account connected to a shipping company. Then he became a hero. The official story claimed he had risked his life searching for Rescue Boat 7 after its unauthorized departure. He received a commendation. His career advanced. His family built a maritime security business on his reputation. That business eventually became part of North Star. What about Thomas? Margaret asked. He stayed with me in the cave until the survivors were moved. Why did he go home? His mother was dying. Silas threatened to have him imprisoned. Thomas was 17. He could have told me later. Yes, The answer hurt more because Evelyn did not defend him. Margaret stood and walked toward the cave entrance. I allowed her distance. Some truths need room when they arrive. Evelyn opened the metal trunk. Inside were photographs, signed statements, and several reels of tape protected in oilskin. A child's red wool mitten rested on top. Ruth's son wore these, she said. He lost one during the rescue. Did he know the truth? Not then, but he learned years later. Thomas contacted him. What did he do? He told Thomas never to call again. Evelyn removed an envelope. His name was Charles Voss, Adrian's father. She handed it to me. The letter inside had been written by Charles. He acknowledged that Evelyn saved his life. He also begged her to remain silent. My father has built everything around the Gull Rock story, he had written. If the truth is released, my children will inherit shame instead of a name. I placed the letter on the table. Adrian knows. He has known for at least 15 years, Evelyn said. And he chose the lie. He chose the company, the money, the family name. Margaret turned from the cave entrance. My father spent his life protecting this evidence. He spent his life trying to decide whether courage arrived too late to count. Did you forgive him? Evelyn looked toward the sea. I loved him. That is not the same thing. Before Margaret could answer, Ranger growled. Not at the cave entrance, at the ceiling. A vibration moved through the stone. Then another. The sound was too regular to be thunder. I touched the wall. Machinery, they are at the station, I said. Evelyn extinguished the stove. The chamber fell into partial darkness. A small red light blinked on the radio receiver. She turned the volume higher. Adrian Voss's voice came through. Team 1, secure the boat bay. Team 2, place charges at the western supports. No one enters the upper building until I confirm Mercer's location. Margaret whispered, he thinks we are still inside. For now, I said. A second voice answered, what about the bell woman? Collateral went still, Voss continued. The dog is to be contained, Mercer is not. The transmission ended. I looked at Evelyn. Is there another way out? A drainage passage leads to the northern beach. How narrow? Too narrow for me. What about Ranger? Possibly. I knelt beside him. His bandaged paw had begun bleeding again. He was tired, old, still waiting for the next command. The hardest thing about loving a working dog is knowing he will give everything you ask, even when you should not ask. I placed my forehead against his. You go with Margaret. His body stiffened. No argument. He looked toward the ceiling. I will draw them away. Margaret stepped closer. You are not staying here. They think I am in the station. If nobody appears, they search the cave. And if you appear, they follow me. Evelyn opened a cabinet and removed an old flare pistol. You cannot face them alone. I will not be alone. Ranger pressed against my leg. Margaret shook her head. You just told him to leave. He has ignored better orders. Ranger looked at me. I almost smiled. Fine, but he stays behind me. Evelyn handed Margaret the Ulsiskins package containing Ruth's statement and Charles Voss's letter. Take these through the drainage passage. What about you? I know another route. You said it was too narrow. For a living person. Before we could ask what that meant, she opened a panel behind the shelves. A vertical shaft disappeared upward. The original observation tunnel, she said. It reaches the radio room. You can climb that? I have been climbing it since before you learned to shave. She looked at Ranger. Get him away from the western supports. That is where they will place the largest charge. Margaret entered the drainage passage with the evidence secured beneath her coat. I watched until her light disappeared. Then Ranger and I followed Evelyn into the shaft. The climb punished every joint I had. The stone was wet. The iron rungs were narrow. My knee threatened to fail each time I pushed upward. Ranger climbed by way of a sloped service channel beside us. His claws scraped against concrete. Halfway up, an explosion shook the cliff. Dust filled the shaft. The lights went out. Ranger lost his footing. I heard his body strike the channel wall. Ranger. A weak scrape answered. I climbed down until my hand touched his shoulder. His breathing was fast. His injured front leg hung awkwardly. I slid one arm beneath his chest. You are not dying in a wall. He licked my wrist. I lifted. Pain tore through my back. My knee folded. For a moment, both of us began sliding. Evelyn reached down from above and caught Ranger's harness. Together, we pulled him onto the next ledge. Another explosion shook the station. Water began pouring through a crack below. The cave was flooding. Evelyn pointed upward. Move, I carried Ranger the final 15 feet. The shaft opened behind the steel panel in the radio room. Evelyn released a hidden latch, the wall swung inward. The room beyond was filled with smoke. Voices came from the hallway. Charge 1 is set. Where is Voss? Boat bay. I lowered Ranger behind the desk. Stay, he tried to rise, his front leg collapsed. That frightened me more than the armed men. I took the flare pistol from Evelyn. Can you reach the tower? Yes. Ring the distress bell. They will know someone is here, that is the idea. Evelyn disappeared into the smoke. I moved into the hallway. 2 men stood near the stairs, carrying fuel containers and demolition equipment. Neither saw me until I fired the flare into the ceiling above them. Red fire burst across the plaster. Both men dropped. I struck the first with the empty flare pistol and drove the second into the wall. Age may reduce speed, it does not reduce the usefulness of surprise. The distress bell began ringing overhead, loud, urgent. The entire station seemed to wake. Adrian shouted from below. Mercer, I dragged 1 fuel container away from the fire. Flames crawled across the ceiling, smoke thickened. Ranger barked from the radio room, not in fear, warning. A third man came through the kitchen. I saw the weapon in his hand. Ranger saw it first. He launched from the doorway on 3 working legs. The man fired, the shot struck the wall. Ranger hit him at the waist. They went down together, the weapon slid across the floor. The man kicked Ranger in the injured leg. Ranger cried out. Something inside me broke loose. I crossed the distance before the man could stand and drove him against the floor. Once, hard enough. Then I dropped beside Ranger. Blood darkened the fur above his shoulder. For 1 second I could not understand what I was seeing. Not again, not him. Ranger tried to stand, stay down. His eyes remained on the armed man, still working, still protecting me. The distress bell continued ringing. Outside another sound answered, a boat horn, then a second, then a third. Evelyn had not rung the bell to frighten Voss. She had rung the old island emergency code. Every fisherman within hearing distance knew it. Fire at Gull Rock, men shouting outside, engines approaching through the darkness. Voss entered the hallway from the boat bay. He saw the unconscious men, the burning ceiling, Ranger bleeding beside me. For the first time, Adrian Voss lost control. You should have left. He raised a pistol. I stood between him and Ranger. You first. Before he could fire, Evelyn's voice came through the station loudspeaker. She had reached the tower transmitter. This is Evelyn Shaw calling all vessels near Gull Rock. North Star personnel have placed explosives beneath the rescue station. Evidence of the 1968 North Haven disaster is inside the building. Voss looked upward. Every secret he had protected was moving across the open marine channel. Evelyn continued. Adrian Voss is armed. Multiple witnesses are in danger. The radio beside Voss's belt erupted with voices. Fishing captains. The harbor master Owen Pike, the county dispatcher. Too many listeners, too late to bury everyone. Voss aimed at the ceiling speaker. I moved, the gun fired. The bullet passed close enough for me to feel the air move near my face. I struck his wrist, the pistol fell. Voss drove his forehead into mine. The hallway tilted. He hit me again, my back struck the wall. He reached for the weapon. Ranger rose behind him. Blood ran down his leg. He could barely stand. But when Voss reached for the pistol, Ranger closed his jaws around the back of his coat and pulled. Voss lost balance. I kicked the weapon through the open kitchen door. Then the western side of the station exploded. The floor lifted. Windows shattered. A wall of smoke and wood crossed the hallway. I fell over Ranger, covering him. The old building groaned. For several seconds, all I heard was ringing. Then the floor tilted toward the cliff. The western supports were failing. Voss crawled toward the rear exit. Evelyn appeared through the smoke. Caleb, the station is going down. I lifted Ranger. His body felt too light. We moved toward the front door. A beam collapsed between us and Voss. He disappeared behind fire and smoke. I heard him shouting, not for the tapes. Even then, even with the building breaking apart around him, he was still trying to save the lie. We reached the front steps as the first fishing boat entered the cove. Owen's Mercy Jane followed close behind. Men ran from the dock carrying hoses and medical bags. Margaret emerged from the northern path with Ruth's statement beneath her coat. She saw Ranger in my arms. Her face changed. The station gave another long groan. Behind us, Adrian Voss appeared in an upper window. He held the plastic case containing Thomas Bell's tapes. He had gone back for them. "Put it down," I shouted. Voss looked toward the burning room behind him, then toward the ocean. He chose the cliff. He jumped from the window onto the sloping roof, slid across the wet shingles and caught the edge with one hand. The case fell. It struck the rocks below and opened. Tape reels scattered into the black water. Margaret screamed. Voss pulled himself onto the roof. A North Star boat moved from behind the island. One of his men threw a rope. Voss jumped. He hit the deck hard but remained aboard. The black vessel accelerated into the darkness before the fishing boats could block it. I watched the reels disappear beneath the waves. Months of evidence. A lifetime of guilt gone in seconds. Then Ranger made a small sound in my arms. The world narrowed. I stopped caring about Voss. I stopped caring about the station. I carried Ranger onto the Mercy Jane while Owen called the mainland veterinarian. His blood soaked through my coat. I pressed both hands against the wound. "Stay with me." Ranger's eyes opened. He touched his nose to my wrist. The same gesture he had used when Eleanor died. A reminder. "I am here." On the dock behind us, Evelyn stood beside Margaret as the rescue station burned. The hidden room was exposed through the broken wall. Flames climbed toward the tower. Everything Thomas Bell had protected appeared to be disappearing. Then Margaret reached beneath her coat. She had saved the oilskin package. Ruth's statement, Charles Voss's letter, the map. Not enough to tell the whole story. Enough to prove the official story was false. Evelyn raised the station microphone one final time. Her voice traveled across the harbor frequency. Rescue Boat 7 reached Gull Rock with 9 survivors. Commander Silas Voss ordered the boat destroyed. I was there. Thomas Bell was there, and I am alive. The tower collapsed behind her. Sparks rose into the night. On the Mercy Jane, Ranger's breathing became shallow. Owen pushed the engines harder. The mainland lights were still miles away. I bent over my partner and whispered the words I had been unable to say to Eleanor before she left me. "You do not have to protect me anymore." Ranger opened his eyes. His tail struck the deck once. Then his body became still. Ranger was not dead. For 7 seconds I believed he was. 7 seconds can hold an entire lifetime. I saw him as a young dog charging through smoke in Yemen. I saw him standing beside Eleanor's hospital bed. I saw him sharing the floor of my truck through 7 months of cold mornings. I saw every time he had placed his body between mine and danger. Then his chest moved, barely. A shallow breath entered him and slipped out again. "He is breathing," Owen shouted. I already knew. My hands pressed harder against the wound above Ranger's shoulder. The bullet had entered near the front leg and passed through the muscle. I could not tell whether it had struck bone or an artery. Blood moved between my fingers. Too much. The Mercy Jane climbed one wave and struck the next with enough force to lift us from the deck. Owen stood at the controls, pushing the engines beyond anything they had been built to give. Margaret knelt beside me. She held a folded towel against Ranger's back while I kept pressure on the entrance wound. "Tell me what to do," she said. "Keep talking to him." "What do I say? Anything?" She leaned close to Ranger's ear. "My father would have liked you," she whispered. "He trusted dogs more than people. He said dogs did not change their stories when powerful men entered the room." Ranger's ear moved. Margaret looked at me. "He heard that." Yes. I did not know whether it was true. I needed it to be. The mainland veterinarian waited at the public dock with 2 assistants and a wheeled stretcher. Before the Mercy Jane touched the pilings, they came aboard. A woman named Dr. Helen Ward cut away Ranger's harness and coat. How long ago was he shot? 23 minutes. Loss of consciousness, several seconds. Breathing changes. Shallow, uneven. She listened to his chest, checked his gums, and placed an oxygen mask over his muzzle. Her expression remained calm. Veterinarians learn the same skill as military medics. They can deliver fear without allowing it into their hands. "We need to move." I lifted Ranger onto the stretcher. His eyes opened as the assistants raised him. "Easy, partner." He tried to lift his head. Dr. Ward placed one hand beneath his jaw. "Save your strength, soldier." They took him into the clinic. The doors closed. I stood in the parking lot with blood covering both hands. Dawn had begun to soften the eastern sky. Fishing boats moved through the harbor. Gulls circled above the warehouses. Ordinary life continued. That was always the strangest part of disaster. Somewhere, a world ends. 10 feet away, someone pours coffee. Margaret stood beside me holding the oilskin package against her chest. Evelyn had remained on Gull Rock with 2 fishing crews to watch the ruins of the station. Owen was speaking to the harbor master and the state police. I looked through the clinic window. All I could see were shadows moving behind frosted glass. Caleb, Margaret said. I did not answer. He is strong. He is you. That is different. No, it is not. She stepped closer. You both keep surviving things because neither of you knows how to leave the other. I looked down at my hands. Ranger's blood had dried in the lines of my skin. Eleanor's final morning returned without warning. I remembered holding her hand after her pulse disappeared. I remembered the nurse asking whether I wanted a few minutes alone. I remembered Ranger beside the bed making that small sound. The same fear entered me now, not fear of death, fear of being the one left behind. My telephone rang. Rebecca. I stared at her name until the 3rd ring. Then I answered. Dad? Her voice was tight. I heard a report about a fire on Gull Rock. They said there were gunshots. I am all right. What about Ranger? I could not lie to her. Not again. He was shot. Rebecca inhaled sharply. Is he alive? He is in surgery. I am coming. You do not need to. I am not asking. The line disconnected. I almost called her back. I did not. Some doors remain closed because nobody is willing to stop holding them shut. Rebecca had just pushed one open. Dr. Ward emerged after nearly 2 hours. Her surgical gown was marked with blood. She removed her cap and looked directly at me. The bullet missed the major artery. My knees almost failed. It fractured the upper part of his shoulder blade and damaged muscle. We repaired what we could. Will he walk? Her pause arrived before the next answer, but he should never work again. He retired years ago. She looked at my face. No, he did not. I lowered my eyes. She was right. Ranger had left military service. He had never stopped working. Not because the Navy asked him. Because I kept needing him, Dr. Ward continued. He has an irregular heartbeat. We also found signs of advanced arthritis and reduced kidney function. None of that is surprising at his age, but recovery will be difficult. Can I see him? For a few minutes. Ranger lay beneath a heated blanket in a recovery room. A tube delivered oxygen near his nose. A clear line entered his front leg. His shoulder had been shaved and wrapped. He looked smaller without his coat covering the injuries. I sat on the floor beside him, his eyes opened slowly. There you are. His tail did not move, one ear lifted. That was enough. I rested my hand beside his paw. I told you that you did not have to protect me anymore. His eyes stayed on mine. You never listen. He closed them again. For the first time since the fire, I allowed myself to breathe. Rebecca arrived shortly after noon. She crossed the clinic lobby carrying no luggage except a small shoulder bag. Her hair was tied back. Her coat was unbuttoned. She looked as though she had left Boston before deciding what to bring. She saw the bandage around my forehead, then the blood on my shirt. Then Ranger through the recovery room window. Her face broke. I had watched Rebecca cry at her mother's funeral without making a sound. Now she covered her mouth and leaned against the wall. I walked toward her. For a moment neither of us knew what came next. Then she stepped into me. My daughter wrapped both arms around my chest. I held her. The last time I remembered holding her that way, she had been small enough to carry upstairs after falling asleep in the car. I thought you were dead, she said. I am sorry. It was the apology I should have given months earlier. Perhaps years earlier. Rebecca pulled back. You do not get to disappear and then apologize only after someone shoots at you. I know. You do not get to decide that loving you is too difficult for me. I know. You do not get to make Mom's death belong only to you. That one entered deep. I nodded. I know. She looked through the glass at Ranger. He came back for you, did he not? Yes, he always comes back for you. Yes, and you keep letting him. I had no answer. Rebecca wiped her face. Then maybe this time you stay for him. The state police interviewed us that afternoon. Unlike the county sheriff, they asked questions as though the answers mattered. Owen had recorded part of Evelyn's emergency transmission. 3 fishing captains confirmed that North Star personnel had been on the island before the explosions. One had photographed the black vessel leaving the cove. The authorities issued a warrant for Adrian Voss. By then, he had disappeared. His boat was found abandoned at a private dock 20 miles north. Blood marked one railing. A North Star employee claimed Voss had boarded a vehicle with 2 men before dawn. No one knew where they went. I did, not the location. the destination. Back to the evidence. Men like Voss do not flee from the truth until they have exhausted every way to kill it. The fire destroyed most of the Gull Rock rescue station, but not all of it. The stone lower level survived. So did part of the boat bay and the hidden tunnels. More importantly, Margaret had saved the oilskin package. Ruth Voss's signed statement described the rescue, the survivors, and Silas Voss's threats. Charles Voss's letter admitted that Evelyn saved him and that the official account was false. The documents did not prove every crime. They proved enough to reopen the story. By evening, reporters had begun gathering outside the veterinary clinic. Someone had posted Evelyn's radio transmission online. Her words spread through Maine, then across the country. A woman declared dead for more than half a century had returned to accuse a decorated commander of murder. A retired Navy SEAL and his wounded military dog had survived an attack on a burning rescue station. North Star Coastal Development had been connected to illegal explosives and hidden tunnels. The story contained everything the public could not ignore. Truth, violence, money, a loyal dog. Margaret wanted to speak to the reporters immediately. I stopped her. Why? Because Voss wants us emotional. Emotion creates mistakes. My father waited his entire life. Then we can wait one more day and do it correctly. We moved the documents to the state archives in Augusta under police protection. Every page was photographed. Every signature was examined. Specialists compared the paper, ink, and typewriter impressions with known records from the late 1960s. The first results came the following morning. Authentic. The word appeared in an official message at 9:17. Authentic ink. Authentic signatures. The state historian requested emergency protection for the Gull Rock site. A federal maritime investigator joined the case. North Star announced that Adrian Voss had acted without company authorization. That was the moment I knew the company was frightened. Organizations defend useful men, they abandon dangerous ones. Voss had become dangerous. Rebecca stayed beside Ranger during most of the second day. She read aloud from an old sailing magazine while he slept. I watched through the doorway. She had Eleanor's patience. The realization hurt, but not in the same way as before. Pain can change when a person stops treating memory like a wound that must remain untouched. Dr. Ward entered and examined Ranger's heartbeat. He is stable, she said. You can take him somewhere quiet tomorrow, provided he does not climb stairs. Rebecca looked at me. You are not taking him back to the island. There is no station left. You know what I mean. I did. You can stay with me, she said. The offer rested between us. Her spare room, the one she had once called mine, a safe place I had rejected because fear felt too much like weakness. I need to finish this. You always need to finish something. This time is different. No, this time there is a dog in a bandage, and I can use him to win the argument. Ranger opened one eye. Rebecca pointed at him. See, he agrees. I sat beside her. After this is over, I will come home with you. Her expression changed. Home, I looked at Ranger. For a while, she nodded. She knew better than to demand more from a beginning. That afternoon, Evelyn entered the clinic. She had changed into clean clothes, borrowed from Margaret. Without the dark coat and lantern, she looked less like a ghost, and more like a tired old woman who had spent too many years carrying a secret. Ranger smelled her hand, then allowed her to touch his head. You saved the tapes once, I said, not all of them. Voss lost the case in the water. Thomas made copies. I stared at her. Where? She looked toward the reporters outside. Somewhere Silas would never search. Margaret entered behind her. My father's workshop. Evelyn nodded. Thomas Bell had hidden duplicate recordings inside the wooden hull of a rescue boat he spent 30 years restoring. After his death, Margaret sold the workshop contents to a maritime museum. The boat still existed. It was displayed in a warehouse near Portland. We contacted the museum director. He agreed to close the building and wait for state investigators. 2 hours later, they found the compartment, 28 duplicate reels. Dry, intact, complete. The truth had survived because Thomas Bell did not trust a single hiding place. That night, technicians restored the final transmission from Rescue Boat 7. We listened inside a secure archive room. Rebecca sat beside me. Margaret held Evelyn's hand. Owen stood near the door. Ranger remained at the clinic, but I felt his absence in every empty space near my feet. The recording began with weather reports, wind speed, wave height, engine temperature. Then Evelyn's younger voice filled the room, clearer than the fragment we had heard behind the wall. We have 9 survivors aboard. It's 4 children. Rescue Boat 7 is taking water but remains under power. Request immediate assistance at the Eastern Channel. Silas Voss answered, You are ordered to remain offshore. We will not survive offshore. You left without authorization. We left because you refused the launch. Return the passengers to the ferry wreck. Margaret made a sound beside me. On the recording, Thomas Bell shouted in the background. They are alive, Silas responded. They are witnesses to theft of government property and unauthorized operation. Evelyn's voice became cold. They are children. A second male voice entered the transmission. Commander, station launch is ready. Silas spoke away from the microphone. Intercept Rescue Boat 7 before it reaches the cove. Then came the words we had already heard. Sink the boat before they reach shore. The room remained silent as the recording continued. The station launch pursued them. Waves struck both vessels. Evelyn directed Thomas toward the hidden cave. Then Ruth Voss came onto the radio. Silas, this is Ruth. No response. Your nephew's here. Silence. He is alive because these people came for us. Silas finally answered. You were never on that ferry. Ruth began to cry. Not loudly, the sound of a person understanding that her own brother had chosen his name over her life. I will tell everyone, she said. You will tell no one. The recording ended after the crash of the second launch. No confession, no final explanation, none was needed. Silas Voss had heard his sister's voice and continued the attack. The archive room lights seemed too bright. Evelyn sat motionless. She had carried that voice for 57 years. Margaret tightened her grip on Evelyn's hand. My father should have released this. Yes, Evelyn said. He was afraid. Yes, he still saved it. Evelyn looked at her. Yes. The third answer gave Margaret what she needed. Not forgiveness, not absolution, a complete truth. Thomas Bell had been brave at 17, cowardly at 20, haunted at 40, persistent at 70. People are rarely one thing for an entire lifetime. The world prefers simple heroes and simple villains because they are easier to remember. Real people are more difficult. The federal authorities announced a formal investigation the next morning. North Star's demolition permit was suspended. Gull Rock Island received temporary historical protection. The company's stock fell. Former employees began contacting investigators. One reported that Voss ordered him to remove tapes months earlier. Another confirmed that explosives had been transported to the island under false inventory records. A third delivered internal messages discussing the need to destroy legacy materials before the sale closed. For the first time, Adrian Voss was losing control of the story. That made him more dangerous. Ranger left the clinic on the 4th day. Dr. Ward helped me guide him into Rebecca's rented vehicle. He wore a support harness beneath his chest. His injured leg touched the ground only lightly. 6 weeks of restricted movement, Dr. Ward said. No running, no jumping, no heroic nonsense. I looked at Ranger. You heard the doctor. He looked toward the harbor. Dr. Ward handed me medication. I was speaking to both of you. Rebecca drove us to Margaret's house outside Rockport. It was a low cedar home overlooking a quiet inlet. Evelyn took the downstairs bedroom. Owen slept on the couch. Police parked near the road. For the first time in days, we were all under one roof. That should have felt safe. It did not. A storm was moving north along the coast. The Weather Service predicted it would strengthen before reaching Maine. Warm ocean water fed its winds. The first rain would arrive the following evening. Gull Rock remained unstable. Investigators had sealed the island, but one section of the hidden tunnel had not been searched. Evelyn believed Thomas left another archive beneath the cliff. The survivor registry, she said. We sat around Margaret's kitchen table while Ranger slept near the fireplace. What registry? Rebecca asked. The names the survivors used after leaving Maine. Their original names, new identities, payments, and where they were sent. Why does it matter now? Margaret asked. Because 2 survivors disappeared after accepting Silas's money. Ruth was one. A crewman named Peter Lang was the other. You think they were killed? I know Ruth was. How? Evelyn looked at the fire. Thomas found her car at the bottom of a quarry in 1976. The police called it an accident, and Peter, no body. No record after December of 1968. I studied the map recovered from the red thread reel. A chamber beneath the western cliff had been marked with a small cross. The explosives damaged that side of the island, I said. Yes. Could the chamber survive? Possibly. Could we reach it before the storm? Rebecca sat upright. No, I kept my eyes on the map. Investigators need the registry. They can retrieve it. They do not know the tunnels. Evelyn does. Evelyn shook her head. My hip will not survive the lower passage. Rebecca looked at me. You have one damaged knee. Ranger has one working shoulder. Evelyn can barely climb. Yet somehow everyone at this table is considering a trip to an island that was recently blown apart. Owen raised his hand slightly. My knees are excellent. Rebecca stared at him. He lowered his hand. I folded the map. She is right. Rebecca blinked. Margaret looked surprised. I continued. We give the map to the authorities. We stay here. Ranger lifted his head at the word stay. Rebecca studied me. You mean that? Yes, it was the correct decision. I hated it. That was how I knew it was probably correct. At 10:43 that night, the power failed. The house went dark. Ranger growled before the backup lights came on. Owen moved toward the front window. The police vehicle near the road was gone. I checked my telephone. No signal, Rebecca whispered. The storm is not here yet. No, a sound came from the back porch. 3 slow knocks. A pause, then 3 more. Margaret went pale, the pattern from the radio room. I moved everyone away from the windows. Owen retrieved his shotgun. Evelyn opened a kitchen drawer and removed a flare pistol. Rebecca stared at her. Does every person in Maine own one of those? Only the sensible ones. Another knock came from the front door. Then Adrian Voss spoke from outside. Commander Mercer. Ranger struggled to stand. I pressed one hand against his harness. Voss continued. I only want the map. I looked at the table. The map was gone. Evelyn had taken it. She stood near the hallway, empty-handed. Where is it? I whispered. Safe. Voss knocked again. The state police officers are alive. Their vehicle is half a mile down the road. Give me the map and nobody else gets hurt. Rebecca moved closer to me. I called toward the door. You lost the tapes. I do not need the tapes. You lost the company. Companies can be rebuilt. You lost your grandfather's name. That was the wound. Not money, not prison. The name. When Voss spoke again, the calm had disappeared. You know nothing about my family. I know your grandfather left his sister to drown. A gunshot shattered the kitchen window. Glass crossed the room. I pulled Rebecca to the floor. Owen fired through the broken frame. A vehicle engine roared outside. Then flames appeared near the garage. Voss had set the fuel shed on fire. Wind pushed smoke toward the house. He is forcing us out, Owen said. Evelyn crawled toward Ranger. Back passage. Margaret opened a narrow door behind the pantry. Stone steps descended toward the inlet, an old smuggler's route. Of course the house had one. We moved quickly. Rebecca supported Margaret. Owen covered the hallway. I lifted Ranger with the chest harness. His weight pulled against my back. He did not resist, though every instinct told him to turn toward the threat. Evelyn came last. The passage ended near a small boathouse below the bluff. Rain had begun falling, not the main storm, its first warning. A wooden skiff floated beside the dock. Owen looked at it. That will not outrun Voss's engine. It does not need to, Evelyn said. She removed the folded map from inside Ranger's support harness. I stared at her. You hit it on him. Voss searches people. Men like him rarely search the wounded. Ranger looked offended. We boarded the skiff. Owen started the small outboard motor. Above us, Margaret's house glowed orange through the trees. A dark vehicle moved down the road toward the harbor. Voss believed we would run to town. Evelyn pointed toward the open water. Gull Rock. Rebecca turned to her. No, the registry is the only evidence Voss still fears. He will follow us, yes. I understood Evelyn's plan. So did Owen. The island was isolated. The storm was approaching. Voss would believe he had one final opportunity to destroy the archive and everyone who knew about it. Rebecca looked at me. Dad, tell them no. Ranger rested against my leg. His breathing remained steady. I thought about Dr. Ward's warning. No running, no jumping, no heroic nonsense. I thought about every order Ranger had ignored because I was in danger. Then I removed the map from his harness and handed it to Rebecca. You and Margaret go to the harbor. Rebecca stared at me. Owen will take you. What about you? Evelyn and I will use the old maintenance boat in the boathouse. No, I am not taking Ranger. Her face changed. She realized what I was doing. Leaving him with her. Trusting someone else to protect him. Trusting Ranger to let me go without following. It felt like tearing away part of my body. I knelt beside him. His eyes searched mine. You stay with Rebecca. He tried to rise. I held his head between my hands. You have done enough. His breathing quickened. You brought me home more times than I deserved. The first heavy rain struck the roof of the boathouse. You do not have to follow me this time. Ranger made a low sound. Not a growl. The sound he had made the morning Eleanor died. My chest tightened. Rebecca placed one hand on his harness. I have him. Ranger struggled once, then stopped. He watched as Evelyn and I stepped into the maintenance boat. Owen untied our line. Storm reaches the island before midnight, he said. We will be gone before then. Nobody believed me. The engine started. We moved away from the dock. Rebecca stood in the skiff with one arm around Ranger's chest. My old partner did not bark. He did not fight. He simply watched me disappear into the rain. 20 minutes later, Gull Rock appeared beneath a sky the color of iron. The burned rescue station stood above the cliff. Half its roof was gone. The tower had collapsed. Smoke still rose from the western wall. Lightning opened across the horizon. Evelyn pointed toward the stone ramp. The tide is high enough to reach the lower tunnel. As we entered the cove, a second engine sounded behind us. The black North Star vessel emerged from the rain. Adrian Voss stood at the bow. He was not alone. 2 armed men stood beside him. The storm had found Gull Rock. So had the man who intended to bury its truth forever. The black North Star vessel entered the cove behind us. Its engines were stronger than ours. Its hull was built for speed. Our maintenance boat had been designed to carry tools between a dock and a lighthouse. The motor shook whenever Evelyn pushed it beyond half power. We were not going to outrun Adrian Voss. That had never been the plan. Take us beneath the station, I said. Evelyn turned toward the stone ramp. The tide had covered most of it. Waves rolled into the old boat bay and struck the burned walls. Pieces of timber floated in the dark water. Behind us, Voss raised one hand. One of his men lifted a rifle. The first shot passed over our heads. The second struck the stern. Wood splintered beside my hip. Evelyn did not slow down. Reminds me of the last time I came through here, she said. You were younger, so was the boat. Another shot struck the water. We reached the entrance beneath the station. The maintenance boat scraped stone, turned sideways, and struck the remains of the launching rail. I jumped into waist-deep water and pulled the bow toward the wall. Evelyn stepped onto the submerged ramp. The black vessel could not follow us into the narrow bay. Voss would have to come on foot. That bought us minutes. Nothing more. The lower level of the station smelled of smoke, seawater, and burned fuel. Half the ceiling had collapsed. Rain entered through the rooms above and ran down the blackened walls. I looked toward the iron access plate. The explosion had thrown it aside. The tunnel waited beneath us. Evelyn lifted the lantern. The registry chamber lies beyond the western passage. The side Voss damaged. Yes, is there another entrance? There was. I did not like the way she said it. We entered the tunnel. Water reached my knees almost immediately. The tide forced itself through cracks in the stone, rising and falling with each wave. The red emergency lights were gone. Evelyn's lantern created a small circle in the darkness. Behind us, metal struck stone. Voss and his men had entered the boat bay. Move faster, I said. I am nearly 90 years old. You climbed a cliff yesterday. I was showing off. Despite everything, I laughed once. The sound did not belong in that tunnel. Perhaps that was why it helped. We reached the steel door where I had fought the North Star Guard. It hung crooked on one hinge. Beyond it, the passage divided. The left branch led toward the hidden archive beneath the radio room. The right descended toward the western cliff. Evelyn chose the right. The water became deeper. Every step sent pain through my knee. I placed one hand against the wall and continued. The passage ended at a pile of broken rock. Voss's explosives had collapsed the ceiling. Evelyn held the map beneath the lantern. The chamber is on the other side. There is no other side. There was yesterday. I examined the rubble. Most of the stones were too large to move by hand. Near the floor, however, a narrow gap allowed water to pass through. Cold air came from beyond it. The chamber had not completely collapsed. I lowered myself and shone the lantern into the opening. Something pale rested beneath the stones, a human hand. I froze Evelyn. She knelt beside me. For one terrible moment, neither of us spoke. Then the fingers moved. A weak voice came through the rubble. "Help me." I pushed my arm into the gap. My fingers touched a wrist. "Alive, who are you, Peter?" Evelyn dropped the lantern. I caught it before it struck the water. "Peter Lang?" she asked. The man behind the stones began to cough. "You took your time." Evelyn pressed both hands against the rubble. "Peter died." That was the idea. The missing crewman from Rescue Boat 7 had been alive beneath Gull Rock. Another dead person who had refused to remain dead. "How long have you been trapped?" I asked. "Since the explosion." "Are you injured?" "My leg, maybe my ribs." Evelyn looked at me. "Peter kept the registry. Then we get him out." A shot echoed from the passage behind us. Stone chipped near my shoulder. Voss had found us. "Leave him," Voss called. His voice traveled through the tunnel. "He has been hiding for more than half a century. He can hide a little longer." I moved behind the corner and looked back. Voss stood 50 feet away with a pistol. One man held a rifle behind him. The other carried a waterproof demolition case. "You brought more explosives," I said. "I learned from incomplete work." Rainwater poured through the ceiling between us. Voss held out one hand. "Give me the map. You are standing on the map. Then give me the registry." "We have not found it. You found Peter." His certainty told me he had known Peter was alive. "You trapped him here. He refused to leave when we cleared the island. You tried to kill him." "I tried to protect several thousand employees from a story that should have remained buried." Evelyn stepped beside me. "Your grandfather said the same thing." Voss aimed at her. "My grandfather built a name that fed 3 generations. Your grandfather left children to drown. He made a command decision. He made a coward's decision." Voss fired. I pulled Evelyn behind the wall. The bullet struck her lantern. Glass shattered. The flame went out. Darkness filled the tunnel. Voss's men switched on flashlights. Their beams moved along the walls. I lowered my voice. "Can Peter reach the chamber from his side?" Evelyn whispered into the gap. "Peter, can you move? Not far. Where's the registry?" A weak laugh came from the rubble. "Safe. Where?" "With the boat 7. Evelyn went still. Rescue Boat 7 had entered the cave during the storm in 1968. The official story claimed it sank. The damaged boat had never left the island. "The lower chamber," Evelyn whispered. "Thomas said it collapsed." "Thomas lied," Peter answered. Voss's light moved closer. "We need another route," I said. Evelyn pointed toward a narrow maintenance shaft above the rubble. "It reaches the sea cave. Can Peter fit?" "Not with his leg." "Then we clear the stones. We do not have time." A shot struck the wall again. Voss shouted, "Last opportunity, Commander." I reached into the water and found a length of iron pipe. "You know what I dislike about men who inherit power?" Voss's flashlight stopped. "They mistake patience for surrender." I threw the pipe down the left passage. It struck the wall with a loud metallic crash. One of Voss's men turned his light toward the sound. I moved through the darkness 3 steps, then 4. I struck the rifle barrel upward as the man fired. The shot entered the ceiling. I drove my shoulder into him. We fell into the water. The second man rushed forward. Evelyn fired her flare pistol. Red light exploded inside the tunnel. The flare struck the demolition case. The man dropped it and stumbled backward. Voss fired toward Evelyn. Peter shouted behind the rubble. I caught the rifleman's wrist and forced him against the wall. He kicked my damaged knee. Pain turned the tunnel white. I lost my grip. He reached for a knife. Then the emergency bell rang above us. One strike, then another. Voss looked upward. I knew that bell. More importantly, I knew who had found the rope. "Ranger," I whispered. The rifleman turned toward the passage entrance. A German shepherd appeared in the red flare light. He wore a support harness. His injured shoulder was wrapped. Rebecca held the handle above his back. Owen Pike stood behind them with a shotgun. "You were told to stay at the harbor," I shouted. Rebecca aimed a marine flare gun at Voss. "You were told to stop disappearing." Ranger's nose lifted. He ignored the gunman, ignored the smoke, ignored me. He turned toward the rubble, where Peter was trapped. Even injured, he had found the living man beneath the stones. Voss raised his pistol toward Rebecca. Owen fired into the ceiling above him. Rock dust fell across Voss's coat. "Next one will be less polite," Owen said. Voss's armed men lowered their weapons. Voss did not. He looked from Rebecca to Ranger, then toward the demolition case lying beside the burning flare. A small red light blinked on the case. Timer, you armed it, I said. Voss smiled. 2 minutes, the tunnel became very quiet. Even his men looked surprised. You plan to bury them too, I said. Voss stepped backward. They knew the risk. One of the men turned on him. You said the charges were remote. Voss shot him. The man fell into the water. Everything moved at once. Owen fired toward Voss. Rebecca pulled Ranger behind the wall. The second North Star man dropped his weapon and ran toward the boat bay. Voss disappeared into the maintenance shaft leading to the cave. The demolition timer continued blinking. 1 minute and 40 seconds. We cannot clear Peter in time, Evelyn said. Ranger scratched at the lower stones. Not wildly, precisely. He pressed his nose toward the gap, then moved 3 feet to the right. He pawed at a section near the floor. I remembered the steel wall, the hidden room, the way he had always shown me what my eyes had missed. There, I said. Owen and I pulled away the smaller stones. Behind them was not solid rock, it was a rusted rescue hatch. Peter had been trapped beside an emergency entrance. The handle would not move. Ranger placed one paw against it. I drove the iron pipe through the wheel and pulled. Nothing. Owen joined me. The metal groaned. Rebecca held Ranger away from falling debris. The timer reached 1 minute. The wheel turned. The hatch opened outward. Water rushed from the chamber and knocked us backward. Peter Lang emerged with it. He was a thin man with a white beard and one leg twisted beneath him. He wore an old naval sweater beneath a modern rain jacket. Evelyn caught his shoulders. For 1 second, the 2 survivors of Rescue Boat 7 looked at each other. No ghosts, no recordings, no official reports. Just 2 old people who had carried the same night through separate lives. You got old, Peter said. So did you. The timer showed 40 seconds. Move, I shouted. Peter pointed into the chamber. The registry. Without it, Silas wins. Ranger pulled away from Rebecca. He entered the flooded chamber before anyone could stop him. Ranger, I followed. The chamber opened into a hidden sea cave. Rescue Boat 7 rested on a stone cradle near the far wall. Its wooden hull was cracked. Its paint had faded. The name remained visible beneath salt and age. Rescue Boat 7. Ranger moved beneath the bow. He smelled the planks, then struck one with his nose. I used the iron pipe. The board broke. Inside the hollow bow was a metal cylinder. I pulled it free. The timer reached 20 seconds. We ran. Rebecca helped Peter through the hatch. Owen supported Evelyn. I carried the cylinder beneath one arm and held Ranger's harness with the other. The nearest exit was not the boat bay. Too far. Evelyn pointed toward the sea shaft. Up we climbed. 10 seconds the shaft narrowed around us. 5 seconds I pushed Ranger ahead. The explosion struck before we reached the top. The world turned into pressure and darkness. Stone broke beneath my hands. Water rose around my face. I lost the cylinder. I lost the wall. I lost Ranger. For several seconds I could not tell whether I was falling or drowning. Then something tightened around my wrist. Rebecca. She held one arm through the opening above. Owen gripped her coat. Together they pulled me onto the cliff ledge. Ranger. I tried to stand. My knee collapsed. Where is Ranger? Rebecca looked toward the water. She had no answer. The western tunnel had collapsed into the sea. Waves filled the opening. Pieces of Rescue Boat 7 floated beneath the cliff. I crawled toward the edge. Ranger, nothing, I shouted again. The storm swallowed his name. Behind us, Peter lay against the rock, while Evelyn held pressure on his injured leg. Owen searched the water with a flashlight. The beam caught the metal cylinder. It floated between 2 broken timbers. Then one of those timbers moved. Ranger's head rose behind it. Rebecca screamed his name. He was paddling with one front leg. The current pulled him away from the ledge. I took the rope from Evelyn's bag. Rebecca tied it around my waist. You cannot go in. I am not leaving him. You can barely stand. Then hold the rope. I entered the water. Cold seized my chest. The current dragged me sideways. Ranger saw me. His ears lifted. He tried to swim closer, but his injured shoulder failed. I reached the timber. My fingers closed around his harness. The next wave struck both of us. We disappeared beneath the surface. The ocean roared in my ears. Ranger's body pulled against my arm. For one moment I was back inside the flooded chamber in Yemen. Then I understood something I had missed for years. I had always remembered Ranger pulling me toward safety. I had forgotten that he did it because I allowed him to. Trust was not weakness. Being saved was not failure. The rope tightened. Rebecca and Owen pulled. We struck the rocks. Hands reached down. Evelyn grabbed Ranger's harness. Owen caught my coat. Together they lifted us onto the ledge. Ranger coughed seawater and lay against my chest. I held him. Not as a handler, not as a commander, as an old man holding the last member of his family who had never walked away. "You stayed," I whispered. His tail moved once against the stone. Above us, a boat engine started. Adrian Voss had reached the northern cove. He was escaping. Peter raised one trembling hand. "Let him go." I looked at him. "He will run." "No." Peter pointed toward the open water. Through the storm, lights appeared around Gull Rock. Fishing boats, the State Marine Patrol, the Coast Guard. Owen had broadcast our position before returning to the island. Voss's black vessel accelerated from the cove. A patrol boat crossed its path. Voss turned sharply toward the eastern shoal, the same shoal that had torn open the North Haven. The storm lifted his boat onto one wave and dropped it sideways. The hull struck rock. The engine stopped. For a moment the vessel hung against the shoal. Then black water entered. Voss climbed onto the bow and waved both arms. The patrol boat approached. The man whose grandfather had refused to launch a rescue now waited for strangers to risk their lives for him. Nobody left him there. The Coast Guard crew entered the storm. They pulled Adrian Voss from the sinking vessel. They saved him. Not because he deserved mercy. Because rescuers do not ask whether a drowning man has earned the rope. That was the difference between them and Silas Voss. It was also the truth Adrian would be forced to live with. The metal cylinder had washed onto the ledge beside us. Inside was the survivor registry, payments, new identities, locations, a signed confession from Thomas Bell, a second statement from Ruth Voss, recorded 2 days before she disappeared, and a list of men who helped Silas bury the rescue. Peter had added one final page. If this record is found, then silence has failed. By morning, the storm had moved north. Gull Rock Island remained. Barely. The rescue station was gone except for part of the stone foundation and the lower boat bay. But the truth had survived, so had every person Voss had tried to kill. Ranger spent another night at Dr. Ward's clinic. She was furious when she saw him. Then she sat on the floor, pressed her forehead against his, and cried. "You are the worst patient I have ever treated." Ranger licked her chin. His recovery took months. He never walked without a limp again. He never needed to. Adrian Voss was charged with attempted murder, unlawful possession of explosives, destruction of protected evidence, kidnapping, arson, and several other crimes. North Star Coastal Development collapsed beneath investigations and lawsuits. Executives claimed they had known nothing. Documents suggested otherwise. The official record of the North Haven disaster was corrected. The 9 ferry survivors were publicly named. The 6 members of Rescue Boat 7 received posthumous and honorary recognition, though 2 of them were still alive to hear it. Evelyn Shaw stood inside the main state house when the governor read her commendation. She did not wear a dress. She wore the same dark coat she had worn inside the cave. Peter Lang attended in a wheelchair. Margaret sat between them. When Evelyn's name was announced, the room rose. She did not smile. She looked toward Margaret, then towards a photograph of Thomas Bell. Courage had arrived late for him, but it had arrived. A year after the storm, the state transferred Gull Rock Island to a non-profit foundation. The rescue station could not be rebuilt exactly as it had been. We did not try. Instead, we built a smaller structure farther from the cliff. Part museum, part training center, part quiet refuge for veterans and retired working dogs. We called it the Rescue 7 House. Evelyn chose the name. Peter complained about it. That was how we knew he approved. Owen ran the supply boat. Margaret managed the archive. Rebecca handled the foundation's legal work from Boston and spent 1 week on the island every month. As for me, I became the caretaker again. This time I knew what I was taking care of. Not only tapes, not only names, not only the remains of an old rescue boat. I took care of the idea that truth can survive imperfect people. That bravery is not always clean. That guilt can become service. That being forgotten does not erase what a person did. Ranger came with me every morning. He moved slowly along the path from our cottage to the museum. His shoulder remained stiff. His muzzle had turned almost completely white. Children visited from schools across Maine. They always asked the same question. Is that the dog who found the hidden room? I always gave the same answer. He found all of us. One evening in early autumn, Rebecca sat with me outside the cottage. The ocean was calm. Ranger slept between our chairs. "You never came to stay in my spare room," she said. "I did not. You promised. I said I would come home with you." She looked toward the museum lights. "This is home?" "Yes," Rebecca nodded. Then she rested her head against my shoulder. "But there is a room for me. There is, near an exit?" "2 exits," she laughed. Eleanor would have laughed too. For years I believed healing meant forgetting the people I had lost. I was wrong. Healing meant remembering them, without allowing the memory to become a locked room. The sun lowered over the mainland. A rescue vessel crossed the horizon, its lights moving slowly through the evening. Ranger opened his eyes. He watched it until it disappeared. Then he rested his head on my boot. I placed one hand against his neck. No commands, no mission, no threat behind a wall, just the two of us listening to the water. I had spent most of my life believing strength meant being the person who remained standing when everyone else fell. Ranger taught me something better. Strength is knowing when to stand. Loyalty is knowing who to stand beside. And love is trusting that when your own legs finally fail, someone will stay long enough to pull you home. The wind moved gently across Gull Rock. The island that had once hidden a lie now carried voices across the ocean. Evelyn's voice, Thomas's voice, Ruth's voice, the voices of children who had survived because 6 people entered a storm when others refused. Their truth had waited beneath stone, water, and fear for more than half a century. Ranger heard it first. Perhaps that was fitting. Dogs do not care which name appears on a report. They do not understand money, reputation, or inherited power. They understand fear. They understand courage. Most of all, they understand who came back. The world had called Evelyn dead. It had called Peter missing. It had called Ranger retired. It had called me broken. The world had been wrong about all of us. That night, a bell rang once inside the Rescue 7 house. Not an alarm, not a ghost. A visitor had opened the front door. Ranger lifted one ear. I smiled and reached for my cane. "Come on, partner." He stood slowly. Together we walked toward the light. At long last, neither of us was searching for a place to disappear. We were home. Gull Rock taught me that a person's value does not disappear because someone powerful removes their name from the record. Truth may be delayed. Courage may arrive imperfectly. Forgiveness may require time. But loyalty leaves evidence that even the strongest storm cannot erase. Ranger never cared about awards, headlines, or who received the credit. He cared about one thing: nobody was left behind. Perhaps that is the lesson worth carrying with us. When someone we love becomes old, wounded, frightened, or forgotten, we do not measure what they can still give us. We remember what they have already given, and we stay. If this touched your heart, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next story in our collection. Your presence gives us the strength to keep telling stories about honor, sacrifice, healing, and the quiet heroes who guide lost people home.